Welcome to the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today we're going to continue our series, the Back to Basics series, by looking a little bit closer into inventory. Last time we looked at how to create inventory. We looked at all the different fields when you're creating inventory. This time we want to look at some of the deeper settings that you can find in your inventory. So for example, if I open an inventory model here, instead of just looking at the settings that we can see in the fields when you click Edit Inventory Item, today we want to look at the different fields and tabs that come along the cross here. So serial numbers, suggestions, alternatives, etc. So let's open an item that I have previously been working with. It's the JBL Eon 15. I should have a few things set up already in here. First, let's just look at each tab from the very beginning. Remember from the last webinar, this particular item is set up as a serialized model, which means that the quantity is built or made out of serial units. So right now, when you look at the quantity tab, we're seeing quantities based on how many serial units we've created. We can't manually change that quantity. This isn't a non-serialized item where you manually change quantities. The way that you change quantity is by adding new serial units. And so the way that you do that is just enter the information along this bar here, making sure it's in the right location, that you're adding it to the right resource type. And then at the very end, you click Add, and that will give you a new barcode or unit for this item. And that would then increase your quantity. If you're not adding any specific information like serial numbers, stencils, models, purchase date, or cost, etc., then you can just enter a certain quantity and click Add, and that will add whatever quantity that you entered here. You would get 30 new barcodes in this scenario. So those are just the first couple tabs there. And then of course we have the out of commission tab. If I were to go and mark any of these units as out of commission, then it would show up on the parent model's out of commission tab, so that we could just look and see all the different units that might be currently marked as out of commission. Let's get into the bulk of these tabs, though, the ones that we really want to focus on. We're going to start by looking at suggestions. Suggestions are things that will pop up whenever you put this inventory model on a quote or a pull sheet. So for example, let's create a test quote. We'll just call this webinar training. The dates don't really matter, and we won't fill in anything else right now. All we want to do is just show an example of what suggestions look like and how it works when you're adding things to a quote. So we saw all the different things that I had as suggestions. There's not a whole lot here, but we have some 3-pin XLR cable. Let's maybe add a couple other things that we might want to add as suggestions when we use this item on a job. So maybe we want to suggest these different mixers. We might also want to suggest some microphones. Put an SM58 and a 57 in there. The idea being that when you put this on a job, you want to easily be able to add items that might go with it without having to drag and drop every single item. So it looks like this. If we go and add this JBL 15 to a quote, let's just say we need 2. It will add the item to the quote, but then it pops up our suggestions window. And this is where I can pick and choose which things I also want to add. So let's say I want to choose this mixer, and it will also automatically multiply the quantity. In this case though, I only need 1, so I'm just going to say 1 mixer, maybe a couple microphones, and go over to my signal cable. Let's say I want to add all of those, and maybe even add a few extra of my 25 footer. You'll also notice a few other things over here. The relationship type is how is this going to add to the quote. These ones by default are going to add as the next sibling, which just means the next line item down. We can also choose whether or not to include these items in the price of the original parent. The other options are added as a child or use the default sort method. Remember last webinar we talked about the auto sort method. If you're using auto sort and you choose for these to fall into the default relationship type, then they will sort based on the inventory group they belong to. So because these all come from audio, they're just going to sort into audio anyway. But if you had a suggestion that was a video item and you said that I want it to add as the default relationship type, then it would go into a video subtotal. That's only if you're in the auto sort mode. I'm just going to do next sibling though. And also notice because I changed that, it automatically selected this one over here. I'll just deselect that. Last thing you might notice over here is this little green arrow. That just means that this line item has its own suggestions too. So if I were to choose that item, I could click that green arrow, and here are all the items that are suggested for that mixer. And I could pick and choose any of these and it would remember those even as I go back to the previous screen. So everything that I checked and entered a quantity for, when I click accept, those things will now add to the quote. So you saw how much easier that was to add a bunch of items to a quote as opposed to dragging and dropping every one piece by piece. Another thing you might have noticed on the Suggestions tab is these suggestion types that we have over here. What these do, remember when we had the Suggestions window pop up, there were those different options like what's the relationship type and is it included in the price. If you assign each suggested line item to a suggestion type, then you can control those defaults so that it will add as a certain kind every time. So in this case, all these XLR cables, remember those were included in the signal cable suggestion type, and so the relationship type automatically defaulted to as child and included in the price. Whereas these other options automatically defaulted to next sibling and not included in the price. And then that's how it looks on a quote. So the way that you can control these suggestion types is by going to your inventory menu, click suggestion types, and you can create a new suggestion type. And this is where you can say any item that's assigned to the suggestion type, I automatically want it to show as included in the price and want it to use this association type. Notice I already have quite a few suggestion types set up. Here's that signal cable one that we were using earlier. Included in the price, yes. Add as child, yes. So those automatically default to that. I also have one called mixers. This one does not include in the price and it adds as the next sibling. So you can get strategic in how these suggestion types work because, for example, when I add a mixer, and let's add these mixers now to the mixer suggestion type, and just click that pencil icon. But when I put a mixer onto, or when I choose a mixer from the suggestions, I probably don't want that to be included in the price of this speaker because a mixer could rent for a couple $100 a day. So in this case, we assign these to a suggestion type that, remember, is not included in the price and will add as the next sibling. We could do the same thing with our microphones. I already created a suggestion type for microphones. It's just called microphones. And same thing, it's not going to be included in the price, and I believe those will also add as the next sibling. Because depending on what kind and how many microphones I choose, that might add a significant price to the quote. Whereas things like XLR cable, that's probably not going to be very significant in terms of pricing, so our signal cable suggestion type just automatically includes it in the price. Let's go back to our test quote and see how that looks different now. I'm just going to delete this and re-add it. Because I added those mixers and speakers, or I'm sorry, the microphones to a suggestion type, look what happens now. I have different tabs for each suggestion type, and it takes on those defaults that were based on the suggestion type here. So that's how suggestions work. Again, if you want to add more suggestion types, just go to your inventory menu, click suggestion types, and you can add as many of those as you want. I've even added some suggestion types that are very specific series on some best practices with virtual items, but we also have some older webinars where you can look at how to build some virtual items and use suggestion types and really kind of change the way that you build quotes. So it's a lot less dragging and dropping and a lot more just checking boxes to add items to a quote. So suggestions are really useful in that regard. Let's look at the next few tabs. We have alternatives and substitutions. These are very related. I like to look at alternatives as an item that's kind of on par with this item that you're looking at. So to me, a JBL Eon 15 is about the same as a Mac E450. So I put that, I just dragged and dropped that into the alternatives tab for the JBL. And look what happens too. Automatically, the Mac E450 will put the JBL into the alternatives. So it kind of creates a relationship between the two. Substitutions, on the other hand, I like to look at these as more of an upgrade. So for example, if we look at our Mac E350, it's kind of a smaller speaker. And if I want to upgrade it, I might upgrade it to a Mac E450, a QSE K12, maybe even a JBL Eon 15. It doesn't really have, I don't have an item in here that I would say is an alternative that's kind of on par with the 350, but there are plenty of things that I could substitute it for. So again, alternatives, kind of this similar item in size and functionality. Substitutions might be an upgrade. Now Flex kind of just puts them into the same category when you come onto a quote though, because the whole reason that you're putting things into alternatives and substitutions is to be able to quickly resolve conflicts when you have them. So let's say, for example, I'm requesting 10 of these JBL speakers, therefore I have a conflict of -2. If I double click that conflict, it's going to show me all the things that I pre-set up as as substitutes or alternatives. It'll show me how many I have, how many I'm going to be replacing. So I just double click that and it will replace, and also ask me if I want to keep the price of the original item, yes or no. But it will now replace that with whatever I chose from the suggestion or from the substitutions. So it's just a really quick and easy way for you to be able to go through and resolve conflicts without having to delete items from quotes and re-adding other ones. You could just quickly do that from alternatives and substitutions. Next tab is the bin. This is basically the warehouse location of this item. So you can see each of my warehouses are listed, and I can come in here and say which section it's in, which aisle, even which shelf it might be on, even down to the very bin if these are smaller items that are inside of a bin. This is really useful for if you have warehouse employees that are constantly rotating and maybe don't know your warehouse quite as well, or if you bring in some freelance help to work in your warehouse. It's really helpful to have these bin locations here because there are several different ways that you can use that. Number one, if we have a pull sheet, so let's quickly confirm this quote and then create a pull sheet. From a pull sheet, it might not be a default enabled report, so you might have to go into your pull sheet settings, but we do have the equipment list with bin locations that you can print, and that will show you all the line items and then have a column that shows which bin location they're located in. So you could print that out and show any of those warehouse employees that might not know where your gear is and just help them be able to find it. Additionally, when you're on the prep screen and actually prepping a pull sheet, you can have the bin location show up over here, and when you hover over it, it will show what bin location you entered. that is a setting in your system. If you don't see bin location on your pull sheet prep screen, just go to Inventory, Menu, Inventory Settings. And near the bottom of this list, you'll see one that's called Show Bin Location Column in Warehouse Screen. Just set that to yes and click Update. So that's what the bin location is. Very useful, again, for helping your employees be able to locate these items when they're prepping them in the warehouse. The suppliers is going to be any default vendors that you could either purchase or subrent this item from. So as you can see, I already have one set up in my subrental supplier preferences. It's basically saying who the vendor is, the lead time, or how quickly I could assume that I could get that item from this vendor, and what the estimated cost might be. I could add multiple vendors too, so let's say I want to add a new one. And let's just look at my vendors and view all of them. Let's take Corinne Lewis here. So that adds her to the list. It might take 2 days to get it, and maybe she only charges $25 for that item. And then I'll click Update. So now I have 2 default subrental supplier preferences. I could also add one to my purchase supplier preferences. So let's go make sure we're on that right tab here, Purchase Supplier Preferences, click Add. And let's just use Corinne again. Say that she rents and sells these. If I'm buying one, it might take about 4 days to get it. And maybe she sells these for $4.50 or something. Click Update. So now I have that information stored here. Now this is a lot more useful than just coming into the Suppliers tab and seeing who I could get this from. Again, if we go back to a quote, and let's re-add that JBL 15, since I replaced it earlier with the Mackie 450. And again, let's say I need 10 of them. I'm not going to add any suggestions this time, but that gives me a conflict. When I double click that conflict now, notice I have all those default subrent suppliers and even the purchase supplier. And just like I did with the substitute section, I could just double click on any of these and watch what happens. It automatically creates a rental PO. And it's telling me now that that turns yellow, just kind of letting me know that you have a rental PO to resolve that conflict. There might be other conflicts somewhere else in your system, but at least you have a rental PO that's resolving the conflict for that one job. If you don't have any other conflicts anywhere else in your system, that would just turn green and go to 0. But this is telling me that there are still some unresolved shortages for this item somewhere. But yep, that automatically created a rental PO. I can now send that out to the vendor. I can even receive that rental PO directly into my system, and we'll look at how to do that in another webinar. But that's how the Suppliers tab works. You'll just add contacts into your purchase or subrental supplier preferences, and then have them really easy access when you go to resolve a conflict. Let's look at these last few tabs. Of course, we have pricing. This is pretty straightforward. It's going to show each of your different pricing models that are enabled for inventory. So we have day rate, each, and week rate. I could disable any of those for this particular item. So if I put this item on a quote, it would not let me use day rate for that item. Maybe I want to take each off for this, because each might be more just for retail items, and I never sell this, so I'm not going to use each. I'm just going to use day rate and week rate. And then I can also come in here and say, well, what is the price that I charge to a customer, and put that information in here. And that's what appears on a quote in the price section here. The cost is going to be something that's more internal to you. So anytime that you rent this item at a day rate, what is the cost going to be to you? This isn't the full replacement cost. You put that information up here, the purchase or replacement cost. This cost is going to be for each speaker you rent out at this rate, how much might it cost you? Now, a lot of our customers don't put anything in here because they don't really need to know that information. But if you want to have something of a profit loss information on your jobs, then you could put something in here and say, like, maybe it cost me $5 to store this, to prep it, all the labor that it takes to maintain it. Maybe I can estimate and say that it cost me about $5 every time it goes out on a job. I mean, you could really put anything you want in here. It's just a calculation that you come up with. So then what happens when I put that on a quote, I could look at my profit markup view or even my job costing view, and that's going to show me both the planned revenue or prices that I've put on there, and it's going to show me any expenses. That's going to come from that cost field that you enter in here. Now, I get this question a lot. What if you need to update your pricing, or if you want to start adding costs into each of your inventory items? You don't have to come over here and double click each item, go to the pricing tab and change it like that. What you can do is click Inventory, Catalog Worksheet, and look what you have here. It shows all your inventory models, and I can come up to my visible columns and say, I just want to view the item names and the pricing information. So I uncheck everything else except for maybe purchase, replacement cost, and all of my pricing models. And then I can come in here and just start entering that information, and everything is automatically saved. It's a lot like a spreadsheet. I could just enter the information, click out, and it automatically saves it for me. It's really useful, saves you a lot of time when you're doing bulk updates of pricing and things like that. Let's look at the last few tabs. GL accounts is really more applicable to if you're doing any sort of QuickBooks integration with us. What you can do with QuickBooks integration is have certain resource types like rental all push to a certain GL account. You can even have certain inventory groups push to a certain GL account, and you can have certain items push to a very specific GL account. A lot of our customers don't really use this. It's really kind of a lot deeper than a lot of people need. Most people just say, if I have rental items on a quote, then I just want that to go into my rental income GL account. But some people might have to get a little bit more specific and say, this inventory item has to go into its own sales or purchase account whenever it appears on a quote. But like I said, most of our customers don't really use that. We do have a few that do. So it's probably not really applicable to most of you. We have the scan log that will show us any time that this item has been scanned. And notice it's showing all the different units that are associated with this model. We also have documents that you can upload. So you could browse for a document on your hard drive, put in a description. Maybe this is a user manual or like a spec sheet or something like that that you can upload to the inventory item. And once you have those things uploaded, other people can click on them to view them right here in Flex. And then last we have the threshold. The threshold was put into place so that people can know when their quantities are going above or below whatever predetermined threshold they put in here. So an item like a speaker might not be something that you put a threshold on, but maybe some expendable items like batteries or tape and things like that might be things that you put a threshold on so that you can know whenever you go below that minimum. So right now I say for my retail stock of gaff tape, I never want to go below a minimum of 20. I could put a maximum in there, but that's not really, I mean, you can never have enough gaff tape, but maybe I'd say I never want more than 1,000. And you could do that per location. So I just did that for Salt Lake City, but you could also do that for any other location that you have. So what this does now, if we look at my quantity, notice I only have 3. I would go and run this report. It's called Threshold Quantity Report Less Than. And if I run this report, it's going to show me everything in my system that has a current on-hand quantity that's less than whatever threshold we put in here. So that's really useful for some of these expendable items. You can run that report every day or every week just to see what your quantities look like and know when you might have to start ordering some more. Some people might use that though for their rental items. I've seen some of our customers do something like this, especially if they have multiple locations. They would say, I never want to have more than, right now we have 0 in Denver. So I might even go down here and say, I never want to have more than 0 that are constantly living in the Denver warehouse. They might be temporarily scanned into the Denver warehouse if I'm doing a transfer for a job out there. But long term, I never want there to be more than that constantly live in that warehouse. So if I'm scanning items in, or if I've transferred items and I've scanned 3 of those speakers to Denver, and they're just sitting in Denver and nobody really realizes that they're not supposed to be there, I could run the threshold quantity greater than report, and it would show me, well, you have 3 sitting in Denver, but you have a maximum quantity of 0. Those shouldn't be there. So that's what the maximum for rentals might help you with. If you have multiple locations and want to be able to keep track of when a certain location might have more than you want them to have. So those are all the different tabs in an inventory model. Really the only difference between a serialized or non-serialized model's tabs, you'll notice, is the serial numbers. So if I open up one of my XLR that's set up as a non-serialized item, I don't have a serial numbers tab to keep track of my serial units because there are no units. Each cable that I own is just tracked by a generic quantity that I hand enter and change the quantities here. So that's really the only big difference. Everything else is about the same. And there are a few other things that you might notice when you start changing the preset of your inventory models. Like, for example, if I set this up as serialized model with accessories, that now gives me a contents tab. If I were to set this up as a serialized storage item, then that would give me a storage requirements tab. And so those are just a few different things that happen when you change the presets, and we'll look at some of those in later webinars. We also have some webinars already online on our YouTube page that you can view to learn more about these different presets and packages and containers and all those things. But that's really the only time that you'll see extra tabs, is when you start changing the presets. If you have any questions about your inventory models and these different tabs, or if you want some best practices, we always recommend going to our forum. It's at forum.flexrentalsolutions.com. Register for the forum there. There's a lot of different users, both Flex users and Flex employees, that go in the forum and can help you out with any questions you might have, or get some best practices from some real-life Flex users. If you have some more technical issues that you're facing, you can email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.